ימינו כקדם.
Eshkoach.
ברוך תהיה.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm back with you. We are back together. And I know how meaningful this time together has become for all of us. And I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to be able to do this during a time where we would otherwise be separate. And that's so important. So thanks for being together, because our being together strengthens every one of us, for sure. I mentioned last night before the service began that when I went away, in some ways, one could say that I wasn't really away because I had my laptop with me. But it's with great pride that I say I didn't open it for the 9 or 10 days, that I knew that I had to get rid of this, the attachment to the screen that calls us constantly, and to feel something else. And so we were away in nature with my adult kids and spouses and grandchildren in a place that was very, very far removed, but really was very reinvigorating and refreshing. And it's such an important thing. So let me begin with the following. Beside my wife, Toby, and our family, our children and grandchildren, there are a few other things which I truly love, many other things. I love food, you should know that, and I love humor, and I love studying. I love this work. I'm grateful all the time that I chose a very fulfilling profession. And at the core of this work is Torah. And what I've learned from Torah throughout my life, as I've learned more and more, has changed me. And ironically, it continues to change me because the Torah takes on new and different meanings. As a very young child, like many of you, I learned the Bible stories. And I learned, like we hear from our B'nai Mitzvah kids in their speeches, that we're supposed to follow these laws. But as I have gotten older, I've learned that we also have to understand the Torah. We have to turn it inside and outside and learn with the rabbis of old and the commentaries of later generations. We have to understand how it spoke in its own time and what it said to the people of its time, but also we have to understand how it spoke to generations moving forward and how it can speak to us in our generation. In fact, what we've learned and what we find very challenging, and I know this from the classes that I teach with you, is that sometimes the laws of the Torah aren't very comfortable, and sometimes it goes beyond that. They're not applicable, and in fact, they seem to be undesirable and need to be reinterpreted and need to be, at times, rejected. In this week's Parsha, we see a commandment to kill women and children. It's not the only place. There are other places in Torah where we find narratives or laws which we frankly find quite objectionable. And yet, we continue to read them. We continue to learn more about the context of them. We try to find meaning. We also realize where we grow and where we have gone. Each of those things in the Torah, each of those teachings in the Torah become moments for deeper understanding and growth. We can evolve from them. And we can use them to create a better people and to actually create a better world. This is what makes it Eitz Chaim. It makes it a living tree. It remains alive with us. I remember my teacher, David Hartman, used to say when he read this Parsha of this week, it used to make him shudder. It used to make him shake. And he would ask himself, why does he continue to read it? And he said, because from it he understood more about life and the way life was and the way life should be. It doesn't bring us to a worldview that's simple. And that's another part of Torah that I love. because although fundamentalists see it as being black and white, we don't. And our tradition never has. Rather, we see that the world is complex, very complex. It's leveled, and it's very nuanced. We have to understand things on different levels. We understand there's metaphor and there's myth. And those things enable us to grow as we learn more. And it's important to be able to understand it from those perspectives. Those who know me also know that there's something else that I love. There's a few other things, but one of the things is I love the game of basketball. I loved playing basketball when I was young. There were a number of years where outside of school, all I did was play basketball and go to Hebrew school. But I also love watching it now, and I love some of the inspiration that has come from some of the incredible stars of the game. I've loved basketball not only because it's a game of great skill, but also because I grew to see that success in basketball is dependent on one's capacity to work with for other people, to be able to work together, to be able to feel what another feels, to see how another moves. And perhaps above all other games, and I ask the Canadians to forgive me, it is totally dependent on team. It depends on each part working with the other part and everybody knowing what their role is. Every once in a while, there's an individual who will stand out, and when surrounded by the right supporting cast, he or she creates a winner. When I was in junior high school, and in high school, I followed the ascension of a fellow by the name of Lou Alcindor from Power Memorial High School in New York City. He was an extraordinary player in high school, and I had the privilege of seeing him once when he played in high school, and then he went to UCLA, and during those days when freshmen could not play on the varsity team, he followed his freshman year by leading UCLA to 3 consecutive national championships. And then he became a pro with the Milwaukee Bucks, where he eventually won an NBA championship with Oscar Robertson, and then later the Los Angeles Lakers, where he won multiple championships. When he became a pro, he changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He did so out of his great sense of a presence of God who demanded humility and submission of himself. For Jabbar was a great talent and also a very, very humble man. A number of great basketball critics have made the claim that Jabbar should be considered the second greatest NBA player of all time and the greatest center who ever played the game. And I know there could be arguments about that forever, but that's something that we'll talk about at Kiddush. So let me try to tie together what I said about Torah and its nuances and complexity, and something that happened with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar this week. And I realize that many of you may have read some of the stories. So in this week's Torah reading, there's another section which is also a little bit troublesome. In addition to Moses ordering the killing of women and children, there's something else. That is, in the beginning of the Parsha, there's a law that states that a man can annul his wife's vows. The woman was property. She ultimately did not have agency. So husbands controlled what their women said or promised. And yet in this section, and obviously that is objectionable with current sensitivities, but in this section, there's something that's very interesting to learn. Because immediately after giving the husband that power, the text insists that the husband uses it instantly or he loses it forever. He cannot choose to nullify his wife's vow later on. Why? The rabbis in the Talmud give a very interesting answer. And they say, silence is assent. Once the husband knows what his wife had sworn, he becomes a participant in her oath. The bond between them was so powerful. And at that point, he either objects immediately or he has to disassociate himself from, and he disassociates himself from her words and nullifies them. Or if he remains silent, then he's linked to her vow. There's something so important about our words. We know that. We heard echo of Kol Nidre in the Parsha today. It says something, there's something so important about the way we respond to the words we hear. In a broader sense, it is about our responsibility to respond to language, the language around us, the words that are said. Silence is like assent. We're living at a time of radical transformation and change and challenge. There's so much political conversation and manipulation, and truly dangerous behaviors are being witnessed, and at times people are being victimized by them. So as you might imagine, we can go to another place here. We can go to many places here. I know that last week you probably heard about the football player named Deshaun Jackson, who grotesquely tweeted horrible anti-Semitic tropes. That was followed by support from another athlete, a basketball player named Stephen Smith, which affirmed that anti-Semitism, and a rapper by the name of Ice Cube. And there was also a Jewish performer. Her name is Chelsea Handler. She posted videos of Louis Farrakhan to her nearly 4 million followers. This came from a Jewish performer. Stupidity and hatred is not limited to others. It's a vulnerability of being human. Last month, the president's re-election campaign exploited anti-Jewish biases, playing on the Rothschild banker controlling the world tropes, as they issued a letter accusing 3 billionaires, all of whom were Jewish, of using their fortunes to control the world and rig the next election. But the Talmud taught us that silence is assent. And so that's why I'm bringing up the name of Jabbar, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because Jabbar wrote an extraordinary article this past week in a popular magazine. And what he did is he critiqued those athletes, and he critiqued those music performers and those public people, those stars in general, who did not express massive indignation. He said what we got from all of them was a shrug, or what he called meh rage, meh rage. In other words, he certainly condemned those who said those things and has been involved in a process of education, but he condemned even more powerfully and more strongly those who didn't respond at all. He understands our culture and he understands the power of the stars. He said, we're on the verge of being destroyed, not by evil, but by apathy. Injustice done to one people is an injustice done to all people. If it's okay to discriminate against one group by calling out cultural stereotypes without there being pushback from leaders and people whose voices are heard, it's going to be okay to do it against any group. A logic, he said, begets a logic. The fact that it was called out by some, including many in Jewish leadership and Jewish organizations, such as the ADL, and certainly by Jabbar, have led to apologies from some of these athletes. There are others who continue to defiantly marinate in their own prejudice, Jabbar said. But as writer Roxane Gay said, he quoted, it's impossible to take one seriously regarding social justice if one remains an anti-Semite. Sports and entertainment are important pulpits in this country. Stars are worshipped beyond that which is healthy. But that gives these people a very special responsibility. We have seen some step up in incredible ways, both in relation to racism and Black Lives Matter and in opposition to anti-Semitism. Sadly, we recognize that racism and anti-Semitism exists powerfully in this country. And unfortunately, we've seen horrific violence in its wake. Jews cannot think that it's a creation of the African American community or the left. Almost every violent act, every burning, and all the murders reflecting anti-Semitism have come this past few years from the extreme right. White nationalist groups such as the ones we saw 2 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. But it does not leave the left out, because we're seeing horrific anti-Semitism from the extreme left also. Jabbar pointed to a song. It was a song that was used in the struggle against racism, and it made the great blues jazz singer Billie Holiday famous. The name of the song is called Strange Fruit, and it was first recorded in 1939. It met a lot of resistance from radio stations because it was because of its graphic lyrics about lynching. Here's some words from the song. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from poplar trees. There were many who wanted to suppress Billie Holiday's song, but the song sold 1 million copies, and it became her best-selling record ever. The song, however, you should know, this song, which was a very powerful protest against lynching and racism, was written by a white Jewish high school teacher from New York named Abel Meeropol, and it became Billie Holiday's most important song. It is our pain. It is our experience of oppression that opens our hearts to others, as it did with Abel Meeropol, and it needs to. You may have read in this, all the press that Jabbar has received, that his father was amongst the first United States military men who went into Buchenwald when it was liberated. And his father saw the piles of bodies, and his father saw children who were starving. He yelled towards the SS. He said, "This is what you've done," as he picked up a child. "You're despicable. You kill children." And then Jabbar's father put a child on his shoulders as he left the camp. The irony is that that child grew up to be Israel's chief rabbi. That child was Rabbi Meir Lau. It's an amazing story. Jabbar obviously learned lessons from his father, from his great sensitivity, and from his own pain. What's happening could lead people to retract, to pull in closer to themselves in their own communities, thinking that they're the ones who suffer the most, or the only ones who suffer, or retract to small ways of thinking about themselves, or the threats or the words they hear from individuals who are extremists. But there's something else that we have to know. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We can't see ourselves as living alone. We're in a much larger world. Our experiences need to be shared, and others' experiences need to be heard. As Jews, we cannot forget, ignore, or give assent to the condition of all humanity. So we have to be outraged by injustice. We have to be outraged by lies. We have to be outraged by the insensitivity we witness towards others in society. These are such extreme times. And poverty continues to grow, and hunger is a problem throughout the world. These times are calling on us. They're calling us to stand up and speak out, to fight, not just for ourselves, but for all who are in need, all who are oppressed. The great late former Justice of the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, once said, "The solution to bad speech is more speech, not silence." Albert Einstein once said that the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch evil and do nothing. And in 2011, at a graduation ceremony at Washington University, Elie Wiesel said to the graduates and to their families, "Do not stand by if you witness injustice. If you witness injustice, you have to intervene, you have to interfere." There was a great philosopher in the middle part of the 20th century who was also a newspaper reporter by the name of Hannah Arendt. And I know she was a character that had many critics. She had many critics. But she coined a term that we use to this day. The name of the term is the banality of evil. And what she said was often misunderstood. She said really bad things can be done by people who seem very good, or people who seem average, or people who seem normal. And that all of us have within us that possibility. We all have different yotzrot. We have to bring forward the Yetzer Tov and we have to repress the Yetzer Ra. The implication is that we have to learn from that and realize there are bad things that are happening that didn't have to happen. There are desperate times and thousands of people are losing their lives around us on these days. We have to call it out. We have to be able to express our anger right now. We have not been led properly. And the result are thousands and thousands and thousands of people dying. Over 130,000. Sure, some would have died no matter how great the leadership was. But so much has been done by an unwillingness of those in positions of power and responsibility to protect us properly. Silence is assent. And as the Torah teaches us, we cannot stand idly by the blood of our neighbors. It may be one of the most important teachings of the entire Torah. We have a purpose in this world. The Jewish people have learned what it means when average people don't speak out and do nothing. And this is something that to this day we continue to bear witness to. Silence is assent. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We'll turn to the service in the Chatzi Kaddish, page 155.
Yasher koach, Rabbi.
Yes.
יתגדל ויתקדש שם רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי די קודשה